My name is Heidi Marie Faessel, and I live up in Whitefish, Montana, and I am a multidisciplinary artist, meaning that I work in a variety of materials, not just painting or drawing or sculpture. I like to do installation and work with fiber and work with found materials, as well as painting and drawing and other things like that. So I'm here at the Holter because 2.5 years ago I submitted a proposal for this exhibit. It was right on the heels of COVID and the pandemic and the isolation period and all of that. And I had made a lot of work during that isolation period and thought that, well, heck, I'll just give it a try. And I was overjoyed when the Holter accepted the proposal. So now, 2.5 years later, here I am installing, and the world has changed, and attitudes and ideas have changed about the pandemic, and it's really interesting to have that kind of distance and perspective now. The exhibit is primarily around 3 themes that I identified with the work, making the work, and over the last 2.5 years. Which are ideas and themes of impermanence, interconnection, and transformation. The materials are all salvaged materials and everyday materials, meaning that I salvaged old t-shirts in some instances, found, a salvaged basket for a piece, old clothing parts that I took apart and put back together. And also the everyday materials are really common things like you might have around the house, which are t-shirts and scrap fabric, baling wire, cotton twine, house paint, a lot of just house paint. They're non-traditional art materials, which means that it's very democratic. They're available to everybody. And I really like the idea of transforming these everyday materials, things that we're familiar with, and transforming them into something that we might not be familiar with, that might look a little bit strange or provoke a little bit of curiosity or wonder. The creature back there, the big black one, that one is sort of special to me because during that, when we first got those orders that we had to stay at home, they were kind of long days, and you're kind of wondering how to fill all this time. And I went down to the basement. I found a box of my journals that I started like 20 years ago. So I had 20 years worth of journals, and I decided to just shred them up into pieces. And from there, I took that bucket of shreds and created a paper pulp out of them, and then added house paint to give them that rich black color, and then had already started the sculpture and got it to a point where it needed a surface. And so I used that paper pulp that I made from my journals and covered the sculpture with a skin of this black paper pulp. And in the end, I ended up calling it the creature. And what's interesting, a little bit of a side note on that sculpture, is that if you walk all the way around it, you'll see a big cavity, an open space in the back. And you look in and you can't quite see the bottom. And it sort of like represents a void or an empty space. And at the time, I was really thinking a lot about the people around the world and watching those numbers grow in terms of not just people that had, confirmed cases of COVID, but all the people that had died from it. And so that idea of impermanence was really in my mind and in my heart. And I got to thinking a lot about what happens after? The biggest mystery of our human existence, what happens after we transition, right? And it made me think of how our bodies in some ways are like a shell, because we have all these bodies and we have all these personalities and we're all walking around like ourselves until that moment where that thing that makes us us is no longer in the body, and the body is like discarded like a shell. And so while I was thinking about these questions and these ideas while making the sculpture, and so in the end I wanted it to have a big cavity to kind of represent that idea of what happens after? What is the void. It's this vast expanse of nothingness, and who the heck knows what happens after. So for me, it feels like a really potent piece because it's personal, but also in some ways universal, the ideas behind it. This piece was born starting right after we had those, the stay-at-home orders where we had to stay at home. And I was just watching those maps, geographical maps grow, those dots grow and grow and grow and get bigger and bigger with all the confirmed cases of COVID and all the deaths and all the stuff. And it was just kind of overwhelming for me to think about. So I went down to the basement. I scrapped together a bunch of large sheets of paper, and I was kind of wedged between the, chest freezer, the washer and dryer, the hot water heater. I had just enough 7 foot of space to piece all these pieces together. And I started just making this piece out of a means to do something with all of those feelings of uncertainty and not knowing and all those unanswered questions and just the strangeness of this moment. Because remember, it did feel kind of surreal. You're listening to me and you're saying, what, we got to stay at home? What, this is happening around on this other side of the world? What, people are dying? This is unheard of. Yes, we had the Black Plague a long time ago, but this is happening around the whole planet. You know what I mean? It's not isolated to an area, which makes it very, very much a historical event that will go down in the history books as something major. I'm pretty certain of that. But anyway, so I used this piece as a way to kind of purge my feelings of concern, grief, uncertainty, etc., etc. And I guess the other pivotal part of it is that this time felt so surreal and kind of impossible. How could this be happening? And then I remembered when I lived in New York City during 9/11, and it was the same feeling of this can't be happening, this can't be real, this is absolutely horrifying. I feel like our sense of security just went out the window, and we're vulnerable. And it was the same feelings with the COVID. It's we're vulnerable. We could never thought that this could happen, right? That there would be some sort of virus that would shut down all these continents and all these countries and all these states and all these neighborhoods and all these homes and all these schools. And it's it really was a historical event. So that's how I coped with my feelings, is being able to pour it into a piece of artwork. So I feel lucky that I have that means of expression.